Did you know that the restaurant chain Hooters once had its own airline?
Hooters Air!
Where the waitstaff got a chance to work at 32,000 feet. But the business didn't last long. Getting a new airline off the ground can be the easy part, but many struggle to stay above and in front of the competition. Take Pan Am. America's premier airline boasted the first ever scheduled international flight and became an icon of early air travel.
A new concept in air transportation.
But that wasn't enough to save the company from going under. And then there's Concorde.
The Concorde, first commercial supersonic transport.
The elegant supersonic jet was the preferred mode of transport for the rich and famous, and could cross the Atlantic in just over 3 hours. Since its last flight in 2003, no other airliner has come close. These three stories have it all: glitz, glamour, and tragedy. So where did it all go wrong?
You might not have known about Hooters Air because it didn't last long.
There you go.
It started in 2003, and initially the airline was successful, but it shut down just 3 years later.
We're here at the Gary Chicago International Airport, where Hooters Air is about to make their maiden flight to Myrtle Beach.
Based in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, it offered low-price direct flights to more than 15 destinations in the U.S. Airfares were a flat rate of $129 each way. So why did Hooters think it was a good idea to start an airline? And why did it fail?
If you like what you see here on the outside, you're gonna love what you'll see on the inside.
Hooters was founded by 6 businessmen in Clearwater, Florida in 1983. A year later, an Atlanta-based group led by Bob Brooks saw the company's potential and bought it outright.
It was the first restaurant chain, so basically they pioneered the idea that they're going to have all their waiters wear short shorts and really tight tank tops.
Do you know why our beer is so cold here at Hooters? Because we keep it in the refrigerator.
From kind of the 80s until the early 2000s, it was a very successful kind of growing business.
By 2003, Hooters was flush with cash, and Bob Brooks wanted to expand the brand. So he bought a small North Carolina-based charter airline called Pace Airlines. He repainted the airplanes with the company logo, and Hooters Air took off.
What would you tell people out there watching the show about flying Hooters Air?
You should definitely do it. It's an experience like no other.
By yourself?
It's going to be the most exciting time of your life.
I'm probably one of the few pilots who can say I actually went to pilot heaven.
This is the voice of a former Hooters Air pilot. He asked to remain anonymous.
There was a lot of intrigue about this airline, not because of necessarily what was going on the inside, but more so what people perceived from the outside.
It's going to be a nice change from the restaurant. Instead of serving food and all that stuff and picking up trash, we get to just basically entertain, ask trivia questions and all that.
A common misconception about Hooters Air was that the flight attendants on the flights were Hooters girls. Not exactly. In addition to the 2 Hooters girls on every flight, there were 3 FAA certified flight attendants.
The flight attendants are the ones who serve all the food and the drinks per usual. I had a professional uniform. I had like a navy blue dress, it was very professional. It had the little owl embroidered emblem on it. We just did the safety procedures and stuff like that. And then we had 2 Hooter girls from different restaurants in the area, but they had no training whatsoever. They were just there just for passenger fun.
What is it all going to include? You guys are going to be up there serving customers?
No wings.
No wings.
But great food.
But great food.
Yeah, we got some soft pretzels, and we got some like pigs in a blanket, and maybe some fruit,
The 2 Hooters girls would get up during the flight and do like trivia or little games or like sing a song. I think they just sat in their seats the whole time until it was their 5 minutes to get up. And that was it. And the rest of the time us flight attendants are working.
Were there ever any incidents that you witnessed of harassment or customers getting a little too inebriated?
I never saw any kind of harassment. There was definitely flirtiness. Any flight, you're always going to come across some people that have drank too much, but nothing bad. It was fun. We did our job right. It was just very happy memories.
Fares from $99. Convenient morning departures and evening returns.
Hooters Air helped out smaller airports like the one in Gary, Indiana, just 25 miles southeast of Chicago.
That's good news. More airline service, more activity, more economic development, more jobs, more people spending money in Northwest Indiana and
Good news.
Southern Chicagoland. So it's very good news, yeah.
And it was a major economic boon to one city in particular, Myrtle Beach.
In its heyday, Hooters Air was bringing between 3,000 and 5,000 people a week into the Myrtle Beach area. Hooters Air was more than just an airline. It was a huge philanthropic contribution to the Myrtle Beach area by Mr. Brooks, who had a vision that the Myrtle Beach area could grow and expand and evolve as a tourism destination and a business community.
Hooters Air was big for Myrtle Beach, but it wasn't enough to keep it airborne. So Hooters shut it down in 2006, citing a $40 million loss.
It was compounded by a couple of factors. They started the airline still as the airline industry was recovering from the 9/11 attacks. People were still scared of getting on airplanes. There was growing low-fare competition in the market as Southwest and other airlines had begun to expand. And jet fuel prices were trending upwards, so it just wasn't an economically viable business.
Hooters chairman Bob Brooks passed away in 2006, the same year that Hooters Air shut down.
There are people at work and people enjoying the Myrtle Beach area that might never have had the opportunity to do so if it weren't for Bob Brooks. So we remain very grateful for his investment in his airline and our community.
Despite the failure of Hooters Air, the Hooters brand continued to thrive.
They've opened hundreds of locations in the US and outside of the US, and they kind of took over the US and then the world.
America, you don't know it yet, but you're going to Europe this summer on Pan Am.
Another airline with dreams of taking over the world was Pan Am, and it almost did. By 1970, Pan Am was carrying 11 million passengers to 86 countries worldwide. Not only is Pan Am credited with pioneering multiple features of modern air travel, it also holds cult status for its iconic aviation style. But after 60 years of flight and decades of financial turbulence, Pan Am went bust. So what happened?
Pan American Airways was founded by two U.S. Air Force majors. It began as an airmail service between Key West, Florida and Havana, Cuba in 1927, and was the United States' first scheduled international flight. Within a year, aviation visionary Juan Trippe took the controls, and Pan Am introduced its first passenger services to Havana. An ad campaign co-sponsored by Pan Am and Bacardi successfully encouraged Americans to fly away from alcohol prohibition in the US to drink rum in the sun in Cuba. And Trippe quickly expanded Pan Am's network. By 1930, Pan Am was flying routes through most of Central and South America. Crucially, it used a fleet of flying boats, or clippers, to land aircraft on the water at destinations that didn't have concrete runways for traditional planes. Since they flew seaplanes, Pan Am pilots wore sea captains' uniforms, a decision that still influences aviation uniforms today. And there were far more important innovations that Pan Am developed in its early days of flight.
Everything from things that we take for granted today, like air traffic control and different flight procedures, different ways of forecasting the weather, of flight planning. Pan Am was the first airline to fly around the world. They actually set a few different records about that. They were the first to fly from the US across the Pacific. It was really a lot. They launched this international service that really helped define what we have today as just regular air travel.
By 1958, Pan Am offered regular flights to every continent on the planet, except Antarctica, giving itself the title of the world's most experienced airline. Pan Am's modern fleet of pressurized aircraft could fly smoothly above turbulent weather, which provided a comfortable experience for passengers. Its lavish cabins were staffed by a multilingual, college-educated flight crew who served luxurious meals like steak, champagne, and caviar.
On October 26, 1958, Pan Am becomes the first American airline to fly jet aircraft. A Pan Am Boeing 707 streaks from New York to Paris in 8 hours. The world enters the jet age.
The powerful new jet engines, which could fly non-stop over long distances, allowed Pan Am to introduce daily flights to London and Paris. And with the introduction of economy class, Pan Am opened the world of air travel to tourists, not just the rich and famous. In 1970, Pan Am carried 11 million customers over 20 billion miles. Thinking that air travel would only continue to grow, Pan Am invested $500 million in a large fleet of Boeing 747 jetliners. But this would turn out to be a big mistake. In October 1973, the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries declared an oil embargo against nations, including the US, that were supporting Israel in the Yom Kippur War. By the end of the embargo in March 1974, the price of oil had risen by more than 400%. This hit Pan Am harder than other airlines because of its exclusively long-haul flights, which required more fuel.
They were the launch customer for the Boeing 747. At the time, that was a great airplane for them to buy. That was the right choice. But the oil crisis really changed things for Pan Am. It was all of a sudden the wrong plane to have. It wasn't the most efficient. It was flying routes that really weren't selling that well because demand for travel was going down. And that was a very difficult time. But when they made the decision to buy the planes, who would have known?
While Pan Am's operating costs skyrocketed, the economy slowed, and America's appetite for international air travel greatly reduced, leaving Pan Am dangerously over capacity, with huge, half-empty jets taking to the skies. As a result, between 1969 and 1976, Pan Am lost about $364 million and was estimated to be $1 billion in debt. Pan Am had long hoped to add domestic flights within the US to its operation, and even talked to a number of domestic operators, including American and United Airlines, to propose a merger. But rival airlines convinced the US Congress that Pan Am threatened to monopolize US aviation, and the Civil Aeronautics Board repeatedly denied Pan Am permission to operate domestically. But in 1978, the Airline Deregulation Act was passed into United States federal law, meaning the government could no longer control airline routes. Pan Am was now allowed to acquire a domestic system, and it hastily purchased National Airlines for $437 million.
It cost a tremendous amount of money to acquire this particular airline to get the routes. They obviously made a choice. They couldn't build from scratch. They needed to go out and buy something. You basically had two cultures going on. Pan Am, very worldly, sophisticated, international. Then you had National Airlines. They were sort of puddle jumpers. They were considered country pilots. So there was a mix of culture that didn't work there. Then you had a different kind of aircraft, and some mechanics have never worked on certain airplanes. I think there was a mismatch there too. Personnel, different airports. Just in general, it was really a small southern airline that was matching up with an international airline.
Within a year of the National Airlines purchase, Pan Am lost $18.9 million, even after selling its iconic Manhattan head office for $400 million. Pan Am continued to self-liquidate to offset its losses. In addition to trading its hotel chains, it sold its entire Pacific division to United Airlines. But Pan Am still had a global reputation as the flagship US airline. However, this claim to fame would attract a devastating terrorist attack above the skies of Lockerbie, Scotland.
On the 21st of December 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 took off from Heathrow. It was bound for New York. It was never scheduled to either touch down or land in Scotland. A bomb that had been placed on board accordingly blew up over a small town in the southwest of Scotland called Lockerbie. 259 people, all aboard the plane, were killed, passengers and crew, and 11 citizens in the small community of Lockerbie were also killed. Pan Am were held culpable and negligent in failing to have adequate security measures. You can have some sympathy for Pan Am because their defence, if it was a defence at the time, was simply that they had carried out the normal security measures that the entire aviation industry did. But the courts took the view that that was inadequate. They had failed to properly secure their plane, and as a consequence, a bag had got on board that shouldn't have been on board in the first place. But Pan Am, you can say, took the hit, metaphorically as well as literally, for an industry where security standards had not got up to speed.
The Lockerbie bombing cost Pan Am more than $350 million and proved to be the final blow to the once giant airline. Just 2 years later, on January 8, 1991, Pan Am filed for bankruptcy. After a bidding war, Delta Airlines purchased the majority of Pan Am for $1.4 billion, acquiring its European routes, its northeastern shuttle routes, 45 jets, its mini-hub in Frankfurt, Germany, and its flagship Pan Am World Port Terminal at JFK International Airport. Pan Am hoped to emerge from bankruptcy court, but after realizing it was losing $3 million per day, Delta stopped its cash advances. After failing to raise money from other sources, a phone call was made to Pan Am's head office on December 4, 1991. The message was, shut it down.
Pan American Airways went bankrupt and they shut down services. It broke people's hearts, really, not just the people that work for the airline, but for many other people that flew it and knew it. And it was the flagship airline of America. Pan Am, this legendary airline with its legendary logo, was the second most recognized trademark in the world at the time. A group of friends of mine actually bought those trademarks, and in fact, I was one of the investors in that group. We bought those trademarks. Unfortunately, Charles Cobb, who was the largest investor, wanted to start the airline again. And we said, but it didn't work last time. We parted ways. He bought us out. He slapped the Pan Am Globe on this airline, which is be sort of like putting the Pan Am Globe on a Greyhound bus. It lasted a couple of months and it crashed. All the other attempts to do something else with the trademark have failed.
But Pan Am's legacy continues to be felt almost 30 years after its collapse. Its innovations remain the pillars of modern air travel. Its brand style has survived throughout the decades as an iconic mid-century fashion statement, with products featuring its sleek retro logo still being sold. And the Pan Am lifestyle is still romanticized in TV and movies, but the airline itself remains grounded.
If a giant of the skies like Pan Am could fail, that meant no airline, no matter how iconic, was safe. Remember Concorde? This sleek engineering marvel darted through the skies at twice the speed of sound and could cross the Atlantic in just over 3 hours. So why is it not around today?
Takeoff was the most exciting part because the power of the engines with this aeroplane, you would be accelerating while you accelerated.
The dream of supersonic flight began more than 70 years ago when American pilot Chuck Yeager first broke the sound barrier.
Through the sound barrier, the first time ever.
So the obvious extension of that was to build a supersonic aeroplane.
In the 1960s, a handful of nations raced to develop the first supersonic passenger jet. The UK and France joined forces in 1962 to work on a supersonic airliner.
100 passengers and all their baggage from London to New York in 3 hours. That's the promise of the Concorde, the joint Anglo-French supersonic aircraft.
Their agreement, or Concorde in French, would shape supersonic flight for years to come. Across the pond, President John F. Kennedy proposed a similar project in 1963. And the Soviets also began developing their own plane, the Tupolev Tu-144. But take a look at this. With its delta wing shape and adjustable pointy nose, it bore a striking similarity to the prototype Concorde. The French accused the Soviets of spying and stealing their designs. It was so similar, the press even nicknamed it Concordski. But all the while, Concorde was taking shape.
The rear section, the fin and the rudder are being designed and built in Britain. French factories at Toulouse are working on the center section of the fuselage and the delta wing assembly.
It was precisely these triangle-shaped wings and the aerodynamic nose cone that would allow Concorde to cruise at such high speeds. Engineers added engines that were twice as powerful as those in a standard passenger plane. And then there were the afterburners. That was the kick that Concorde needed to go supersonic. In 1968, the Soviet Tupolev took off from Moscow, becoming the first supersonic jetliner to fly. 2 months later, Concorde also began test flights. The US withdrew from the race in 1971 because it was too expensive. That left the Tupolev to go head-to-head with Concorde at the 1973 Paris Air Show. The Concorde flew flawlessly, but what was supposed to be a triumphant demonstration by the Tupolev ended in disaster. 6 Soviet crew members and 8 French civilians on the ground were killed. Soon after the show, Concorde secured orders from a dozen airlines from around the world, while Tupolev disappeared from the international stage. But Concorde didn't get off to a good start either. The price for each aircraft tripled.
When it became clear what the operating costs of the aeroplane were going to be, the future orders disappeared.
In the end, only 14 planes were sold. Finally, on January 21st, 1976, 2 Concordes took off simultaneously on their first commercial flights to Rio de Janeiro and Bahrain. Concorde effortlessly broke the sound barrier, and the aviation industry was changed forever.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. As you notice, we're coming up to twice the speed of sound.
Concorde eventually flew to more than 85 destinations, including Caracas, Singapore, Toronto, Bali, and Sydney. Passengers enjoyed a 5-course meal that included champagne, foie gras, and salmon.
It was a sexy aircraft. Nothing like it since.
There were only 100 passengers. That's a quarter the capacity of a 747. You could even rub shoulders with rock stars.
Had a menu where I was collecting my favorite rock stars' signatures.
There were also soccer players, supermodels.
Well, of course, there was Elizabeth Taylor, who I always wanted to meet, David Frost, Diana Ross.
And of course, royalty. But being a part of the club came at a cost. In 1986, a one-way ticket across the Atlantic cost more than $2,000. That's more than $5,000 today. 10 years later, the fare had doubled. But it wasn't just costly for the passengers. It required 22 hours of maintenance for every hour it was in the air, while a 747 only needed about 8 hours. And the oil crises of the 70s, which greatly increased fuel costs, didn't help. In 1977 alone, British Airways reportedly lost more than $60 million in today's dollars, and Air France more than $180 million. And what made it so special would also be its kryptonite. Concorde couldn't fly over land because of the thunder-like noise it created when it broke the sound barrier. But it was also noisier than other planes on takeoff and landing. That's why it was originally banned from landing in New York. But finally, a Supreme Court ruling allowed Concorde to fly to New York in November of 1977. Eventually, Concorde cut a number of destinations to focus on the more profitable New York route. Flying at more than 1,000 miles per hour, the Concorde slashed the journey time from New York to London from about 8 hours to a little over 3.
It's always exciting to get to New York before you've left.
You're moving at 23 miles a minute. You do the length of Manhattan in 30 seconds.
And finally, Concorde became profitable. By 1983, British Airways reportedly made more than $10 million, and Air France more than $3 million.
You'd be taxiing out to take off and you'd see lines of people waiting to watch you. It always drew a crowd.
In '96, it earned another record, the world's fastest commercial flight across the Atlantic. It was Captain Scott himself who piloted that flight on this same aircraft. Another strategy that helped Concorde turn a profit was special chartered flights. Like the time passengers saw the last total solar eclipse of the millennium for $2,400. That's about $4,000 today.
It was wonderful. I've waited all my life to see this, and I'm jolly glad I didn't miss it.
The whole concept of it changed, and we began to get more passengers.
But despite the boost from these chartered flights, by the mid-90s, it was getting harder to fill the plane. Fewer businesses could justify the cost to fly their executives over to Europe for lunch, and the rise of other airlines' first-class cabins competed against Concorde.
We've put a few noses just a tad out of joint.
It was simply going out of fashion. And then disaster.
The mortuary vans are still arriving here.
On July 25, 2000, an Air France Concorde caught fire upon takeoff from the Paris Charles de Gaulle airport. More than 100 passengers on board and 4 other people on the ground were killed as the plane crashed in a suburb of Paris. Investigators found that the Concorde had run over a piece of metal on takeoff, and as one of its tires ruptured, it struck a fuel tank.
It was a massive, massive shock. We could not just take it in. And to see those pictures of it going down, even now, I feel shivery just thinking about it.
Concorde flights were halted for months and retrofitted with stronger fuel tanks.
They decided to shut down the airplane altogether, which we didn't feel was right. We felt as though we could have carried on, but we didn't.
Concorde did fly again, a test flight on September 11th, 2001. But the plane landed in London while the World Trade Center was under attack. Flights resumed 2 months later, but the Concorde's decline was unstoppable. The 9/11 attacks caused the steepest decline in air traffic in history.
So it never really got back, in my opinion, into full operation again. It was always doing too few flights. Costs were still pretty much as high as they ever were.
The airlines tried to power through, but passenger numbers never recovered, nor profit margins. In April 2003, executives announced that supersonic travel would come to an end. The last flights were seen as a farewell tour for a plane that had become a celebrity in its own right.
It's very weird to think that it's not going to be in the skies anymore.
Air France operated its last commercial Concorde flight in May 2003, flying from New York to Paris. And British Airways followed 5 months later, flying from New York to London.
This was a huge step in technology and being able to travel supersonic speeds. And the fact that it is being phased out, I think is quite shocking and very saddening.
And that's the moment that supersonic air travel froze. For 27 years, Concorde pilots had flown almost 4 million passengers across the globe. Does it bring back memories?
Yeah, it does. All of them, even the bad ones are good. The exciting ones, when something goes wrong, even they're good too. Because I'm still here.